Anatek the Ancient, overlord of the Talmis Dynasty, was angry. And this was remarkable. It had been eons since he'd felt anything at all, and now, anger? Frustration? It wasn't a hot boiling rage, rather a cold, relentless fury. The long sleep had not been kind to him or his dynasty, now at long last being woken after countless millennia, pulled from stasis by canoptic automations, he was faced with this. Lesser, brutish beasts invading his kingdom, his world. Siontech, the Skorpek Lord, was making a report, his voice edged ever so slightly with trimmings of maniacal insanity. Before the long sleep, he had been naught but a mindless killing machine, but the Cryptex had worked hard in the intervening millennia to return some semblance of soundness to his mind. They appear to be a de-evolution of the Krork, my lord, call themselves Orks, or so we have observed. They managed to infiltrate only the topmost levels of our complex. It seems their leader has been trying to make use of technology scavenged from our upper halls. Anatek's hand formed a fist. This cannot be allowed to continue. Do we have the location of this Ork? Yes, we believe so. Then let us go hunting. It has been too long. Siontech gave a slight nod, the long bladed fingers of his flensing claws twitching in anticipation. He could not have agreed more. It had been far too long. It was a good day to be an Ork, and Vex Edzapper, Big Mech of the Silva Sunz, was certainly enjoying it. Not only had he had success with his latest tinkerings with the tech they'd found, but now it seemed someone was looking for a fight. "We're being shot up, boss," came the crackled cry through the vox, the sounds of shooters wildly firing in the background. "It's them metal boys we saw sleeping, except they ain't sleeping no more." Vex grunted his acknowledgement. Better get the rest of the boys together. They'd want to join in the fun. He turned and strode from his workshop, calling to his warband's Weirdboy as he went. "Oi, Black Bolt, time to go. We got some eds to zap." Never one for words, even by Orc standards, Black Bolt just gave a howl of glee and fell in behind his boss. They stepped out of the workshop and into a small Orc camp, which was already alive with action. Vex's personal bodyguard, Meganobz with buzzsaws, were already climbing into the back of a nearby truck, its engine roaring to life in a cloud of thick black exhaust fumes. Nearby, boys mobbed up, working themselves into a frenzy as their enthusiasm for battle began to bubble over. A Deff Dread lumbered past, its dread claws snapping open and closed and saws buzzing as it went. "Come on, boys," Vex called. "It's crumpin' time." Anatek was less than impressed with his small force that gathered. The Cryptex had promised him more, but most of the tomb was waking up or required extensive repair work. He would just have to make do with what was available. He was sure his force would be more than enough to destroy these Orks. After all, who could stand against the might of the Talmis Dynasty? They strode onto the battlefield as one. Anatek centered himself in amongst his warriors, ready to issue commands. The Canoptic Reanimator strode to his right, ready to lend its nano scarabs to any damaged friendly units. Siontech, the Skorpek Lord, had gathered his Skorpek destroyers around him as an honour guard, their lust for battle barely kept in check. 20 warriors assembled close together, creating a barrier between the leadership and elite units and anything which might suddenly appear within charge distance. Out front, scarab swarms spread themselves wide as a vanguard, looking to intercept any enemies that came too close. Meanwhile, sticking close together, the Orks entered the battlefield. Vex put himself in the middle of the mob, projecting his custom force field to protect his small force. The Meganobz were in the truck, their lack of speed becoming irrelevant now that they had a vehicle to take them quickly into battle. The Deff Dread made sure it was at the front of the pack. Vex had just installed some fancy new shiny bits onto it. Orkmatic pistons, designed to get the walker quickly into the heart of battle. The pilot of the mechanized war machine was keen to try them, wanting to be the first to reach the enemy. Knowing this, the boys wisely all kept behind, standing within Vex's custom force field, but not in a spot where they might be trampled or run over by the Deff Dread or truck. Black Bolt stood closest to Vex, ready to utilise his strange and weird abilities. The nearby Orc boys, mildly unsettled by his presence. The excitement amongst the Orc mob was growing. Howls and roars of glee joined with the occasional Slugga shot in the air. It was battle time. Anatek ordered his force forward. The relentless march towards the enemy had begun, but between them and the Orks stood a large rocky outcrop. It could be traversed, but would take too long to do so. Instead, his forces would skirt the edges. The Scarabs advanced, a wave of skittering and buzzing insectoid machine. Behind them, the warriors began to move, marching in rank and file, heading to skirt the south side of the central outcrop. Anatek himself fell in behind them, a plan beginning to form in his ancient mind, his iron will to be imposed. The Canoptek Reanimator stalked forward on its long legs, advancing towards the enemy, but staying in touch with units that might need its support. The Skorpek destroyers were hot on the Reanimator's heels, hungry to battle the living, with Scion Tech falling in behind them, his support and leadership used to keep their insanity in check. Anatek was impatient. His forces still far from the enemy, he wondered if a trap might be sprung. Making a split-second decision to catch the Orks off guard, he engaged his Veil of Darkness. The very fabric of space and time rippled and shifted. A moment later, Anatek and the warriors were somewhere else entirely, on the opposite side of the battlefield and within striking distance of the Orks. Emerging from the Veil of Darkness, Anatek gave the command, imposing his will on the warriors as they opened fire with their Gorse Flayers, the green blasts of energy streaking towards the Ork boys. Although their aim was good, many of the energy beams were absorbed by Vex's custom force field. Some shots still found their mark though, and in the end, 11 boys were deconstructed atom by atom. Anatek drew his tachyon arrow. Aiming at the Deff Dread, he fired, hitting but only causing minor damage. Anatek was mildly underwhelmed by the shooting efforts of his warriors. If he could just thin the Ork numbers a little more, much of their attack would be blunted. He ordered the warriors to charge into the boys. Worst case scenario, they would tie up the enemy while the Skorpek destroyers got into range to join the combat. As the warriors engaged the enemy in close combat, Anatek allowed himself a moment of pride at the speed his forces had moved over the battlefield. The enemy would face the wrath of the Talmis Dynasty. However, though the warriors struck their foe, the Orks turned out to be more resilient than expected, and only a further 2 were killed. Then the Orks hit back, howling battle cries as they struck the Necron warriors. Their attacks were numerous and brutal, ripping apart a total of 7 warriors. Due to the proximity of Anatek and his immortal pride, the warriors were not allowed to be affected by their losses. Having lost so many of their numbers though, Vex urged the boys to stand firm. Insane bravery would have to be employed to keep the boys pushing forward. Vex had been a bit surprised at how rapidly these metal boys had appeared and then charged into his lines. Mind you, that was fine by him. Just the way the Orks liked it. Always better to get up close than stand back and use your shooters. The Deff Dread wasted no time. Turning about, he rushed onwards towards the nearest enemy, looking to charge in and get his claws around them. Over the top of the swirling melee combat in front of him, Vex could glimpse a lone, large Necron. It looked like it was him that was calling the shots. He'd have to be dealt with. The Meganobz jumped out of the truck and formed up around Black Bolt. Normally, Orks would keep their distance from the Weirdboy, but in the middle of battle, such feelings of unease were lost in the joy of a fight. The truck itself surged forward, creating a physical barrier between the Ork mob and the approaching Skorpek destroyers. If they wanted to engage the Orks that way, they would have to get rid of the truck first. Vex started moving to get into a better point to charge the Necron warriors from, while the boys just stayed locked in combat. As he stomped away, Vex called back to Black Bolt. "Get the Meganobz to jump over the back there. See if they can't hurt that metal boy's boss over there." He gestured at Anatek. Black Bolt didn't need too much encouragement. He closed his eyes and drew on the combined psychic power of the Orks around him. There was a flash of green light and the Meganobz disappeared. A moment later, a crack and a roll of thunder was heard as they reappeared on the far side of the battlefield within charge distance of the now unprotected Anatek. Vex was out of range of his flamer, but urged the Boyz to fire their sluggers. Experiencing the joy of combat as they were, it was the sort of thing that they might easily forget. With classic orcish marksmanship though, not many shots hit, and those that did bounced off the warriors' metal bodies. The truck fired its heavy shooter at the scarabs. All shots missed. Not that this concerned the orcs though, they just enjoyed the loud sound the weapon made. It took a brief moment for the Meganobz to steady themselves as they re-emerged from black bolts to jump psychic power. Shaking their heads to clear the after effects, they revved their soul blades and charged towards Anatek, who turned in surprise to meet their attack. The Deff Dread was close enough that it didn't even need to break into a run before smashing into the warriors. Vex also joined the fray, lifting his power claw to crush the enemy. The Meganobz crashed into Anatek, their buzzsaws whirling. The weapons were a little cumbersome, so it made getting a clean hit a bit harder. Some attacks missed, while others seemed to pass right through Anatek himself as his phase shifter kicked in. Some blades found their mark though, their spinning edges cutting deep. Anatek was almost slain, only just surviving the onslaught. With Anatek in such mortal danger, protective protocols kicked in on the warriors. To have any chance of saving him, they would have to fight now, and they would have to fight well. Beset as they were on all sides, their attacks were split between multiple opponents. Those that hit against the Orc boys killed 3, while the other attacks bounced off the Deff Dread and Vex's armour. The Deff Dread immediately thought back, its huge claws crushing 4 warriors. Vex hit out at the closest Necrons, his killer claw smashing 3 to pieces. With the Deff Dread and Vex being so successful in combat, the boys suddenly found themselves without a target to attack. "Oi boss, stop stealing our kills!" Anatek was taken aback by the sudden appearance of the Meganobz. They were bigger and faster than he could have predicted, and he seethed inwardly for making such a bad tactical error as to allow himself to be in such danger. He had not slept for 60 million years to awake and die now. He attacked them back, but their armour proved thick and difficult to pierce. He did some damage, but not nearly enough. Anatek found himself surprised and caught off guard. His anger burned. He felt the living metal of his body begin to reform as it started to repair some of the damage done to him by the Meganobz. Nearby, 5 of the broken Necron warriors began to stand back up, their reanimation protocols kicking in. The battle hung in the balance. Anatek was suddenly on the defensive and surrounded by enemies. He fell back from combat, and as he did so, he called the nearby Necron warriors to do the same. They gathered around him, forming a barrier to protect their warlord. The scarabs, meanwhile, flew clean over the truck and landed near the Orc boys, their intent to engage in close combat evident. Psiontech, the Destroyers and the Reanimator found themselves out of position. Their initial plan had been thwarted by the Orc truck and the way it had positioned itself. This, combined with the perilous position that Anatek had put himself in, called for a change of plan. They switched direction and advanced, quickly as they could, to lend their support to the embattled Overlord. None of the Necron force would be able to shoot or bring their ranged weapons to bear, as they had all either advanced or fallen back from combat. In an attempt to slow down the Orc boys, the Scarabs looked to set upon them. As the swarms charged, the Orcs fired wildly into them, managing to do a small amount of damage. The Scarabs descended upon the Orc boys. Although, being individually small and weak, there were that many of the Scarabs that they caused the Orcs some issues, managing to slay 3. The Orcs weren't about to take this attack lying down though. Still annoyed at being robbed of the chance to attack the Necron warriors, they set upon the Scarabs, stamping and swinging weapons wildly. The sheer numbers of attacks they were able to bring upon their enemy ensured that all of the Scarabs were destroyed. Having killed the last one, the mob of boys turned their attention back towards the Necron warriors and began slowly advancing towards them again. The Meganobz found themselves cut off from the Necron Overlord by a wall of Necron warriors. Initially, they considered charging straight in and continuing the fight, but then sensed movement from behind them. More Necrons were coming, a tall war machine of some sort, surrounded by smaller, three-legged, blade-wielding types. This looked like a new good challenge. What a fun day it was turning out to be. They turned and headed to intercept. Meanwhile, the Deff Dread thundered towards the Necron warriors. Vex took the chance to move in close to the lumbering mechanized machine and perform a couple of very quick repairs, fixing some of the damage that had previously been done by Anatek's Tachyon arrow. Following their success against the Scarabs, the Ork boys surged forward towards the Necron warriors, eager to engage in combat again. Black Bolt brought up the rear, slightly lost in his own world as always. The truck, realising its defensive manoeuvre had proven effective, and now watching the enemy change direction as a result, set off in pursuit, ready to fire its shooter and perhaps even charge into combat. Black Bolt reached out with his mind and crushed two warriors with Warpcraft, laughing maniacally as he did so. The Ork forces began to open fire as they closed on the Necron warriors. Needless to say, as Orks are not known for their marksmanship, this proved to have limited success. The Ork boys' Sluggers managed to fell one warrior. The Deff Dread turned its Scorcher on the same unit, engulfing another warrior, causing it to fall. Vex proved more accurate though. He let out a guttural laugh as he first flamed an additional two warriors before a lucky shot from his shooter put another one down. Meanwhile, on the other side of the battlefield, the truck sprayed wildly at the closest target, the Skorpek Lord, Siontech. Although managing to hit, the shot bounced harmlessly off the Necron's armoured shoulder. The Meganobz were on top of the world, new enemies, ones they had never seen the like of before. With howls of glee, they charged into the Skorpek destroyers, their buzzsaws roaring with motion as they went. Vex stood back and urged the nearby mob of boys forwards. Best to let the boys have a go this time. They needed no encouragement, crashing towards the Necron warriors, whose Gorse weaponry flashed as the Orks closed, felling one boy. The Deff Dread paused for a moment. If only it could find a path around the small rocky outcrop nearby, it would be able to directly attack the Overlord. The Ork truck continued its pursuit. Achieving ramming speed, it moved towards the Skorpek Lord at a rapid pace. The Meganob's charge momentum sent them hurtling into the Skorpek destroyers, their buzz blades sending showers of sparks into the air as they cut through their foes. All three Skorpek destroyers were slain before they had a chance to retaliate. Anatek cursed as he watched the Meganobz create another bottleneck that would delay any help from getting to him. He wrapped his iron will around the remaining Necron warriors and forced them to fight on. They swung, but their heavily reduced numbers meant they only managed to kill a single Ork boy. The Ork boys fought back with renewed vigour, their leader first, failing to do any damage. The rest of the mob joined in, but with so few targets, the boys got in each other's way, only managing to kill 3 Necron warriors, leaving 1 still standing. The truck did its best, ramming the Skorpek Lord in an attempt to slow it down. This didn't seem to have any effect though. Siontech turned, and with grim enjoyment at finally being back in combat after all these long years, set upon the truck. He landed multiple blows, his hyperphase harvester cutting through crude armour with ease. The truck exploded in a huge ball of flame, sending shrapnel and debris into those nearby. Siontech and the Canoptic Reanimator both took damage as they staggered under the shockwave of the explosion. One Meganob was slain outright by a cartwheeling piece of truck, and another slightly wounded as the fireball from the blast washed over them. The living metal on Siontech and the Reanimator immediately began to repair the damage the explosion had caused. Anatek too continued to heal from the grievous wounds caused to him by the Meganobz. Meanwhile, 7 warriors stood back up, swaying on their feet as reanimation protocols knitted them back together. Anatek was still in mortal peril. The enemy had continued to close in on him and he was forced to once again fall back. He positioned himself against a jagged rock sticking up from the ground to fend off the potential of attack from behind, while he ordered his warriors form a protective wall against the Ork attack that was sure to come. Meanwhile, Siontech and the Canoptic Reanimator moved past the remaining Meganobz, getting themselves into a position for which to unleash upon the enemy. The Reanimator, with its limited cognitive ability, simply turned and fired its atomizer beam at their nearest target. However, the shot went wide, scorching a deep gouge into the earth. The Meganobz were completely unharmed. In the midst of battle, Siontech felt more alive than he had in a very long time. For a precious few moments, the empty ache he had felt since awakening from biotransfer all those years ago was dimmed. He saw things more clearly than normal. Believing his close combat ability would be more than enough to finish the Meganobz, Siontech instead chose to fire his Emitic Annihilator at the Ork boys that were rushing towards Anatek. 6 shots and 6 Ork boys fell, disintegrating as they hit the ground. The warriors, under the effect of Anatek's will, also fired their Gorse blasters at the boys, felling a further 5. Siontech was a whirl of motion. Having loosed his shots at the boys, he turned and charged at the Meganobz, the Reanimator joining him. The Necron warriors stood still, continuing to form a barrier between Anatek and his enemies, silent as always in the face of their oncoming foes. The Reanimator attacked the Meganobz with its elongated claws, managing to further wound the already injured Nob. Siontech came in, swinging his Hyperphase Harvester, finishing off the already hurting Nob, but unfortunately leaving one alive to attack back. It did so, bringing its buzzsaws to bear, the screech of metal on metal as it impacted Siontech. He cried out in rage as he was damaged by the crude but effective weapon. He was badly wounded, but managed to survive. Just. The Meganob laughed, lost in the joy of battle. The final boy looked around in surprise. His entire mob had disintegrated around him. "Oh, I'm getting out of here," he yelled as he turned and fled. Vex had a moment of surprise. Suddenly, he found himself outnumbered. He wasn't concerned by this though, all the more enemy for him to fight. He moved forward, closing on the Necron warriors, making sure that his Scorcher was in range and that he'd be able to make combat with ease. "Follow me, Black Bolt," he called as he ran. The Weirdboy did as he was told, closing as quickly as he could. "Circle around so we can trap him," Vex called to the Deff Dread, which stomped forward, moving into a position that allowed him to burn up more Necron warriors with his Scorcher, and then charge the Overlord. Black Bolt once again reached into the warp in an attempt to smite the warriors in front of him, but no longer having the collective psychic might of the boys around him, he was unable to manifest the power. "Flame them metal boys," yelled Vex, ordering the Deff Dread as to where it should be aiming. It happily obliged, bathing the squad in a fiery blast from its Scorcher. However, when the smoke cleared, only one had fallen. Vex would just have to do it himself. He opened up with his Scorcher too and fried 4 of the enemy. The shots from his shooter, however, went wide. As the Necron warriors fell, the way forward was opened up to Vex. He finally had a clear path to the Necron Overlord. With a battle cry, he charged in, joining in combat with the warriors as well. Black Bolt followed, engaging only the warriors. The Deff Dread though decided to go the other way. It wanted a bigger and better fight. Why fight the little metal boys when you could fight the big metal boys? It was an easy choice to make, so instead it charged towards Siontech and the Canoptic Reanimator. The Deff Dread ploughed into Siontech, his claws snapping and swinging, but the Skorpek's phase shifter flared to life, and killing attacks passed straight through the Necron's body without causing injury. Anatek found himself suddenly face to face with a very large orc. "I'm Vex Edzapper," yelled the beast. "Prepare to have your head zapped." "Away, orc! You have no place in my kingdom," replied Anatek as he brought his hyperphase glaive into a guard position. The attack seemed slow, but the orc was incredibly strong and had a very large power claw that seemed to make up for any deficiency in pure fighting ability. Even as the Necron Overlord tried to parry the blow, the claw just smashed on through. Gripping around Anatek, lifting him high, it crushed him. Not even the phase shifter could make a difference. He was torn in two. The ruined, living metal construct that had housed Anatek fell to the ground and disappeared in a sudden green flash, phasing back to the tomb below. Black Bolt was locked in a combat of his own, swinging his staff at the warriors. He did no damage. Siontech felt Anatek phase out. The fool had been arrogant and had paid the price, but he couldn't focus on that now. Instead, he struck out at the remaining Meganob, but his moment of distraction cost him. Most of his attacks were sidestepped by the orc, and the one that hit bounced off the mega armour, leaving a deep gouge, but the wearer unharmed. The final Meganob, bringing its buzzsaws to bear, failed to do anything as it impacted Siontech. The Reanimator struck out at the Deff Dread, but failed to do anything, the thick metal plating of the mechanized walker turning aside the elongated claws. Finally, the Necron warriors, suddenly without the presence of their overlord, struck, managing to slightly wound Black Bolt. The Necron warriors remained in battle despite their heavy losses. Siontech's living metal body continued to repair itself. Reanimation protocols on the Necron warriors also flared, and 7 more returned to their feet. The battle raged on. Again, the Deff Dread tried in vain to bring down Siontech, but once again its attacks were clumsy, and the phase shifter saved the Skorpek Lord. He immediately struck, throwing all his attacks at the final Meganob. This time, the Hyperphase Harvester found its target, and the brute was slain. Meanwhile, having finished with Anatek, Vex turned his attention to the warriors. "Why won't you metal boys stay dead?" he yelled, killing one with his claw as he spoke. The warriors split their attacks between Vex and Black Bolt, striking where they could. Some lucky hits found weak points in Vex's armour, slightly wounding him, while Black Bolt seemed to just shrug off the damage he took. He struck back at the warriors, his staff splitting 2 in half. The Reanimator swung at the Deff Dread, but once again, its attacks did nothing but scratch the paintwork. Although locked in combat, Black Bolt was still able to bring his psychic ability to bear on these foes. His eyes glowed green as power manifest, ripping 3 warriors apart with warp energies. Fighting through a wall of fire, Siontech momentarily lost track of his target. And though he swung his Hyperphase Harvester at the Deff Dread, it caused no damage. Meanwhile, against the Necron warriors, Black Bolt struck out with his staff, slaying yet another one. The warriors, though, would not go down without a fight. As one, those remaining turned and attacked Black Bolt, first knocking him off his feet before delivering the final blow. Black Bolt would take no further part in this battle. Vex saw Black Bolt fall. While the Necron warriors were distracted, he took his chance. Catching them almost unaware, his killer claw struck, slaying the last 3. They fell, phasing out as they hit the ground. The Canoptek Reanimator's elongated claws struck at the Deff Dread again, and, once again, were completely useless against it. The external vox of the Deff Dread crackled with a projected laugh as he stepped forward once more to fight Siontech. His claws flashed, ripping at the Skorpek's Lord's limbs, but he grasped nothing but air, the phase shifter once again doing his job. Siontech's living metal continued to ripple and meld, slowly healing battle damage received. The Deff Dread was beginning to get frustrated. How did this metal thing keep avoiding his attacks? With a bellow, it once again engaged with the Skorpek Lord. The powerful multi-limbs moved, claws reaching to tear apart the enemy. Siontech found himself gripped tight, being crushed, and then the phaser shifter flashed again, and he was free, the Deff Dread suddenly overbalancing as its prey shifted through time and space. Siontech took his chance, bringing the Hyperphase Harvester down in a powerful swing. He completely destroyed the Ork mechanized walker. It stumbled and fell. With a roar of triumph, the Skorpek Lord turned to face the remaining Ork, the boss that had ended Anatek. Vex walked forward towards the final two Necrons. He was all alone now, but he wasn't defeated. He lifted his killer claw to mock them. "I'm coming for your gits." If Siontech had been capable, he would have smiled. He would end this Ork right here and now. The Ork came forward, taunting them, and just as the Skorpek Lord was about to charge, the fabric of time and space rippled and he felt himself pulled through dimensions as he was phased back to the tomb. Vex blinked. They'd disappeared. Run away. Classic. Orks are the biggest and the best. Of course they had run away. He gave a laugh. It really was a good day to be an Ork. Siontech appeared in Anatek's throne room. The Necron Lord lay on a stone slab, attended to by Cryptex. "I almost had him, my lord," spat Siontech, his anger flaring at being taken from the field of battle. "Not today, Siontech. We've waited this long, we can wait a little longer. We will not underestimate the enemy again. Once this tomb is fully awakened, we will destroy these all. We will begin the journey of reclaiming our rightful place. The Talmis Dynasty shall reign supreme."